You're listening to Spectrum on the new True Oldies 105.9 WJZW Woodbridge, Washington. I'm Thomas Grooms, and joining us on the phone this morning is May Pang. And May is here. She has a brand new book out entitled Instamatic Karma. And we'll be talking about May and her book and her career. But without further ado, May, good morning. Welcome to Spectrum.
Well, thank you for having me, Tom.
Great to have you here in the nation's capital. I know you're very excited with the success of Instamatic Karma, your new book. Tell us a little bit about its impetus.
Well, I mean, these are the photographs I've had for so many years. They've been sitting under my bed, actually, in a little box, and I would take it out and every so often somebody will come over, and I would have these people say to me, they don't match up with what goes out, in the sense of the party line, but the stories that you read out in the, out in the circles out there. And finally, a friend of mine convinced me and said, "Come on, you've been doing this for so long." He says, "We got to get people to see what I see." And I said, well, they got to see the John that you've been seeing and what the real story is behind it all. So in the end, this is what I put together, these pictures that I took. And it's, just so to clear it up, obviously Instamatic Karma is a play on his song, the title, Instant Karma. But the pictures, there's some Polaroids, but the majority were taken on my 35 Nikon camera.
You had written a book in the 1980s about your time with John Lennon, I believe, in 1983, a memoir?
Right. It was called Loving John.
How did that do?
At that time, it did well, but it was a lot of people were more skeptical because it was the first of its kind coming on, going out there talking about the situation and my time with John, that people were not really sure about it. And over the years, everything I've written, now people want to hear about it because they now find out bits of the truth, and it keeps coming out, and they go, well, we want to get that book, and now it's out of print. But I am thinking about doing a new one with a lot of the storylines that we didn't make it the first time around. People now would be more curious.
You were very fortunate because getting into the music business in the late 1960s was a feat in itself. You, of course, were the personal assistant to the former Beatle John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono. But you started in the record business in the 1960s, and as you know, today in 2008, the music industry has changed. We don't even have A&R people. We don't have record reps coming out to the radio station. I had the pleasure of interviewing a friend of yours, Joey Molin, a couple of weeks ago. He was here for Hippie Fest 2008, and I said, Joey, the music business, it's changed. What do you think about iPods and downloading? And he goes, man, I miss the record guy, the guy with no shoes. Remember the Stones wrote the Under Assistant West Coast promo man, the guy in the seersucker suit? You were a woman back then doing that job. What was that like? I mean, you were a woman rep for the record company, plus you did production coordination, you were singing on the record, but you were part of the music scene back then. So maybe you can give us your assessment of how things have changed.
Oh, it's changed drastically. I mean, Joey's right. I mean, and you're right about that. I mean, there's, when someone says the record business, my peers, we all sit around and we just say, what record business? It's a lot different. I mean, I do miss the old days, where you had your promotion men. The greatest promotion man I have ever met is Al Corey, which is a picture of him in my book. He worked his people out there pounding the pavement, going to the radio stations, trying to get the records played for Capitol Records. He's a man I had admired for a long time, and recently I just met up with him when my book came out in Los Angeles. Oh, I was so thrilled to see him again. John loved him. I mean, it's that old-time feeling. I think, in this day and age, a lot of the kids have missed that part. It's part of the schooling, and I was just very lucky. And yes, at that time when I first entered into the business, I mean, there were no Asians. I was, lucky enough to get in, lucky enough to be in a business working with Alan Klein. He's infamous, but I have to tell you, he was an amazing person to learn from. I met Harold Sider, who worked there and who later became John's advisor. And then I got to work and meet people like from Phil Spector to Richard Perry. I even met some of the more infamous people like, the Morris Levy's of the world. But I got an all-around education. And my favorite part of the music business was being in music publishing, because I loved to hear the music. I wanted to know about the writers, the songwriters, and their inspiration, where they got it.
Definitely lived a dream that many would love to have just even, had a rapport with John Lennon. But here you were, a teenager out of school. You went to the record company. How'd you get the job? Because, in radio and records, you just don't apply for a job. You don't fill out an application.
You're right. But I happened to do that. I actually went upstairs when I saw, I actually was in this building, and I had quit college. I mean, after a year, I said, well, this isn't for me. And I decided, well, I can do something, maybe be a receptionist. And I got sent by an agency to this building. So I was applying for a receptionist job at a bicycle company, and afterwards I came downstairs and my girlfriend met me, and she says, you know what's in this building? I said, what? She goes, Apple Records. I said, are you kidding me? She goes, no. So I looked on the directory, and I said, oh my God, I'm going to go up and ask them for a job. And she goes, are you nuts? I said, what could they say to me except no? I mean, if they said no to me, I'm not any worse off than where I am now. And that was my I had more guts back then, and I said, okay, I'm just going to go up and do it. And I got off the elevator, and my girlfriend left me. She says, you're nuts. And she left me, and I just got off the elevator, and I saw this woman sitting there, and she said, can I help you? And I said, I was wondering if there was a job opening. And she said, well, not to my knowledge. And so I said, oh. And she saw me looking around, and I knew she knew that I was curious at this point. I said, do the Beatles ever come up here? I mean, this is still at a time when they were still together. They were still doing their album. And I'm like, oh, my God. She says, no. And, she was just being very pleasant with me. And just at that moment, and I guess fate had its play in there, and I guess there's no such thing as coincidences. All these men were walking out. And she just happened to turn around and say, this lady's looking for a job. And this guy says, come back after lunch. Now, in my mind, in the working world, it was a 9 to 5. I had no idea this was a 10 to 6 job. So I came at the 1 o'clock lunch hour, just as all these people were filing out. And I came back after lunch, and they said, can you type? I said, sure, which I couldn't. But I taught myself. And I did so well. They hired me on the spot. I was walking on eggshells.
On the telephone with us is May Pang, and she's calling us from New York. And May, of course, was the personal assistant to former Beatle John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And she has a brand new book out, Instamatic Karma. And you can pick the book up online at your website, right, May?
Absolutely.
And your website is?
maypang.com.
Sharing that story about going into the record company, just plugging yourself. I went to WHFS, I think, in 1971. Murray the K was there, and of course you know his rapport with John Lennon. And I wanted a job, and I talked to him, and sure enough, it was a free-form radio station, and got in, I think, back in 1972. And I remember one evening when Murray was on the air, John and Yoko called in because they were going through the immigration debacle. Mm-hmm. And he had to get off the phone because All in the Family was on. He said, I've got to go now. I've got to watch Archie Bunker. He liked a lot of Americana stuff, like Archie Bunker. I mean,
well, that actually came from a program. We actually took that program from an English program, but only we Americanized it, and he enjoyed all that. I mean, John was a big Americana fan.
If the computer was around when John Lennon was around, do you think he would have thrown it out the window, or would he have been enamored by it?
He would have embraced it. I'll tell you why. John was really a person that wanted things done like yesterday. He wanted things done. And on the picture on the cover of my book, there's a picture of him holding the SX70, the Polaroid. He's taking a picture of me as I'm taking a picture of him. That SX70 was an instant, you got your instant picture. He loved the fact that you can get everything at that moment. When that particular camera was being marketed, it was marketed in Florida first, and he had heard about it. He sent somebody down there to get it before it was sold nationwide, and he loved it. So he would have embraced the computer because he would have done things at home. He could do things. He probably would create havoc online to everybody by sending out emails to everyone.
I mentioned Murray the K. I work for WABC. That's our home office up there in New York. And John had a rapport with WABC. I mean, I go back to when I was a kid pulling in WABC here in Washington just to listen to the Beatles at night, talk to Cousin Brucey. But then after the format change, when they became news, John became friends with Howard Cosell.
Correct.
And was in the building a lot. And I used to talk to Rick Sklar in the 1970s.
And, it was all done with, Rick Sklar and he was around and again, it was Al Corey and his team, and we got very friendly. John and I were there when Howard Cosell invited us to Monday Night Football. Here we were. I mean, John didn't know anything about football, but he did it, for Howard, and we went out there. We met Runa Arledge, and, we did this whole thing. So it was amazing. But I will tell you, while we were doing the Monday Night Football, John got to meet his idol. While the Rams were losing, but John got to meet his idol. And his idol was this comedian named Jonathan Winters.
Really?
Yes.
My goodness.
He was so thrilled. And, of course, he then met the then Governor, Ronald Reagan.
He was an amazing community activist in the 1970s, and that was the time you cherished because you were with him. And, of course, we know about him stopping the war, make love, not war. But he did so much in New York. And, after 9/11, I was happy to see Paul McCartney there at the firehouses and the concert because John would have been proud.
Absolutely. I think, a lot of things that went on and a lot of people didn't realize, even during the 70s, even though there were the Beatles not talking to one another openly, they, when we were recording, everybody was around. We would stay. We had a house when we were working with Harry Nilsson, and Ringo was living there. And during the days, we would have visitors, and Paul and Linda, with their kids, came by for a visit as well. So in the book, there's a picture of John and Paul just hanging out. There were no animosity, no nothing. It was just like two old friends that hadn't seen each other.
And the fact that you were working in the music business, and this point gets missed a lot, you were developing bands, and that is so important. As I said earlier, talking to Joey Mullen, how that is missed today in 2008.
Yeah.
I mean, working with Harry Nilsson, I remember John did the liner notes for Harry's first record. I mean, he loved him as a person and as an artist. And John also, when you go back, I had a copy of this once upon a time, the album Grapefruit. John, of course, wrote the liner notes for Grapefruit.
Right.
Whatever happened to them?
I have no idea. There was some great bands that came through Apple. And I really don't know. I mean, there was Splinter.
Mm-hmm.
There was, oh, God, you're making me think. It's like Jackie Lomax.
Oh, yeah. Sour Milk Sea.
Yeah. There were some amazing group of people that each individual Beatle themselves wanted to help their own, and get them off the ground. And I think some of them went on to other bands, or they played with. I mean, I've run into a couple here and there where they say, we haven't seen each other. This is what I do now. But it's been a long time. I mean, there was Derek and Lon Van Eaton.
Sure, and I think George Harrison also brought in the 5 Stair Steps to the family, right?
Is it 5 Stair Steps? And of course, we had we had Ravi and all, and and the Radha Krishna Temple, and it was such an eclectic group. And when you would go to Apple in London, you see these people walking in and out all the time. It was very funny.
In other words, he had his finger on the pulse, for developing bands. But my question, May, is, you know how MTV revolutionized progressive formats in radio? You know that.
Yes.
I felt it in 1981 when I was at the radio station. It was the last freeform station to go because they were dictating what got played. You had to make a video to have a hit record.
Right.
And it's changed the playing field.
But John... It was funny because John and Yoko really were ahead of their time in certain ways. John was, in the fact that he did Imagine. We did the Imagine movie, and what we did was he did clips, and it became the video. That's what you see all the time.
Did he realize how big that tune was while he was alive?
No, because it wasn't an anthem until really more. Until much later on. And but it was quite interesting that they filmed in the sense of like a documentary. It was almost like the music video where they did different filming and he sang to the song, to his album. There's 2 Imagines. There's a documentary that Andrew Solt did with interviews and everything, and there was Imagine the movie that both John and Yoko did where you see the clip is Imagine, where he's sitting at the piano.
On the phone with us, if you just joined us, Miss May Pang, and she is an entrepreneur, song plugger, author. She has a brand new book out entitled Instamatic Karma, which is available on her website at maypang.com, right?
Right, and I mean, if they don't get a chance to go that way, they can always go to the local bookstore, I believe.
And pick it up. Going back to your job as a record rep, very important. I said you were an Asian American woman in the record business in the late 1960s, which was unheard of. I had a very special friendship with a Washington, D.C. icon and national icon, Link Ray, who John idolized and Pete Townsend idolized. He lived here in Washington. He used to tell me, he'd say, I'm up in New York, and I was at the record label office, and John Lennon was on the elevator, and I didn't know what to say to him, but he has a scooter. He has a motorcycle. Is that true? Did he like motorcycles?
Oh, he definitely liked. In fact, he was he liked the stuff, but thank God he wasn't driving when we were together. He loved it. In the book, as you can tell, there's a picture of John standing next to a motorbike. And it's a Harley. And we were coming back from Las Vegas, and we're coming through the desert. And we made a pit stop at this Calico ghost town, I believe. It's a tourist thing. It used to be an old mining town. And he kept staring at this bike. It was a trike. It's a 3-wheeler. He kept staring and staring. Finally, I just turned around and I said, John, why don't you just go stand next to it? And I took a picture of him with the bike, and people think it's his bike. Mm-hmm. But it isn't, and it wasn't, and, to this day, God only knows whose bike it is, and one day if he sees the picture, he goes, gee, that bike looks familiar.
But he did ride a little bit. Back
at home. He rode on his scooters and things.
I did mention your work as a record rep, and it's not out of the ordinary. I mean, think about it. David Crosby met his wife, Jan. She was a record rep working for ABC Records, I believe, at the time.
Oh, my.
So he has, a very personal relationship with her to this day. You must have had quite a personal relationship with John Lennon, and I know it's another show to even talk about what was going through his mind. But we all hear rumors that the Beatles were going to reunite and that Yoko Ono was against it. The truth of the matter is, you would know. You spoke with him every day. Did he want to get back together with the Fab Four?
You know, there was a point. He had open dialogue when we were out in Los Angeles. It started to have open dialogue with Paul. He started having, you know, and of course he was having open dialogue already with Ringo. We were seeing him a lot. But Paul was basically the one, and then later on, I mean, as the time went on, we also saw George. He was not opposed to it. He actually was beginning to think it wouldn't be a bad idea, and we talked about it, and even Harry Nilsson and everybody was talking about it, that maybe in late '74 that maybe they could do a one-off. And that's what was happening. But everybody's timing, everybody's commitments were all over the place. But they thought about it. And he definitely thought about it. He was really thinking about it all the way around.
May, this morning we're going to have you play disc jockey because we'd love to have you set up some of the records that you helped produce. And when I think about Link Wray and I think about the old rock and roll, you know, John Lennon was there at the beginning. He idolized Buddy Holly. I believe he kissed Jerry Lee Lewis's boots at one point.
Oh, right. It's so funny because one of the members of his band didn't realize it was actually me that was with John when that happened.
So what I want to talk about is the album Rock and Roll. I love that album. He did Stand By Me, which is the Benny King classic. Tell us a little bit about that project because you were there at the beginning and for the fruition, for the end.
Well, you know, we started it off after doing Mind Games. John was in a great form. We were out in Los Angeles, and he said, you know, I'd love to do an album. Just do an album of songs of people that I've admired and that influenced me. And we got the chance to see Phil Spector. And he said, it'll be great. Let Phil produce it. What better person to do it, you know? And he says, I'm ready. So we had a couple of meetings with Phil, and he goes, Phil, I don't want to be anything but the singer in the band. I don't want to do anything. I don't want to produce. I'll let you do it. He goes, you're going to give me the full control? He said, sure. I know you'll do a great job. Not thinking, because even though Phil had been on other projects before as a co-producer with John, we never thought it'd be worse than that or anything. What could be bad? Well, we didn't realize it was going to be such havoc of doing an album out in Los Angeles. I mean, John, if most musicians, once they work with John once, they realize John really is a no-nonsense person going into the studio. If he's producing an album, he wants to get it done. He doesn't care. If you want to drink, he says, he'll always ask, let's do everything, whatever you do, let's get through the day. Let's get through the evening. Whatever you want to do after that, that's fine. But it's hard enough. And he would always say it's hard enough to memorize everything we have to do. So without, taking something and not getting through the night. So he really would like everything done. So when he would call for a 7 o'clock session, he meant 7 o'clock. Be ready and able to work. He does, and one musician one night was late. Got a little annoyed, to say the least. And that musician never was late again.
I'm sure it sounds like the same standards that are applicable with the late Rick Danko and Levon Helm up there in Woodstock.
Yeah, I mean, John was really very much on time. He was he was a no-nonsense person. But when we started out, it was a very relaxed situation. We're in Los Angeles. John never did an album in Los Angeles. So we're thinking, okay, this must be, a laid-back situation. Didn't have a clue that Phil would be late 3 hours for the first night. So we were doing all this craziness. I mean, everybody was drinking, and John was the new kid on the block, and everybody was having fun at his cost, He was the one that everybody would notice. Other musicians would walk away when havoc just erupted or, anything that went on.
Sure, the fall and decline.
Yeah, they weren't going to talk about, Joe Schmo as the drummer. They're going to talk about John Lennon. And that's what happened. And unfortunately also when Phil shot his gun off in the studio, there I was, heard the shot. I come running in the door and I go, what happened? And I see Mal Evans, late Mal Evans, who was the Beatles roadie. He was there to help out, and he just grabbed the gun out of his hand and saying, give me that. He goes, you shouldn't have that gun. And I'm standing there going, what is going on? what was that noise? And he said, Phil said, you can't tell me what to do. It was this whole thing going on. And finally, it was over nothing. And John, with his finger in his ears, going, Phil, if you're going to shoot me, but don't mess my ears up. I need them. And John and I always believed that at first that, Phil had carried these guns. We thought, can't be real. Can't be real bullets. Nobody will let him have it. And, of course, then later on, the next day, Mal says, we dug up the bullet. We said, what bullet? And we just sort of looked at each other and went, oh my God. They've been they were real.
Sure.
And we never thought, all this time we never thought they were.
With us this morning on the phone from New York City, Miss May Pang, who is an author and personal assistant to former Beatle John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono, and she has a brand new book out. We're talking about rock and roll and staying focused. During that time, from 1972 through 75, you were in the studio producing a lot of work. You worked on Walls and Bridges, as you mentioned, also Pussycats with Harry Nilsson, so many different bands, and, of course, Yoko Ono's solo projects, right?
I did. My last solo project with her was Feeling the Space, where she used all the New York session musicians, which were fantastic. I mean, that was amazing. And when John, I didn't produce it. I did more of the production work, but I have to tell you, it was amazing to watch all this happening and watching all the New York musicians, because it was different now. He had been working with, prior to that, with Elephant's Memory, and now you're working with New York musicians, and you're talking about pros, and it was a total different feel. They came in, they knew, they read, they knew how to, read notes and the whole thing, and it was a great experience for John.
And as I said earlier, John was so visible in New York City, quite an activist for being the new kid on the block. I think back to David Peel and his band. I mean, they had some great times together. You know that. Yes,
but by 1973, he was turning the corner. He just wanted to be, as much as, he always wanted peace, but he needed to go back now to making music, which is what he was losing himself, Mm-hmm. He wanted to go back to making really good music. That's why he ended up doing Mind Games, and then we were trying to get back to rock and roll. And after that, with Phil taking our tapes and we couldn't go back to it, John decided to work and produce Harry Nilsson. And then he did a couple of jam sessions, one with Paul and one with Mick Jagger, and then we came back to New York and we were working with the Walls and Bridges, which was John's first and in his lifetime his only #1 album with a #1 single.
I understand that you also sang on that record.
Number 9 Dream, I did. And in fact, I just had a barbecue the other day, and Laurie Burton, who was at the time was the wife of Roy Cicala, who was the engineer that John always used. And Laurie is an amazing singer, and is also an amazing songwriter. She actually wrote, remember the Rascals, I Ain't Gonna Eat Out My Heart Anymore?
Sure.
Yeah, she wrote that. So anyway, I always have a jam session at my home, and I finally coaxed her to getting up and singing I Ain't Gonna Eat Out My Heart Anymore, and I said I would sing backup with her.
Wow.
The first time the two of us sang together since 1974.
Well, I believe Felix is living in Tennessee last time I saw him.
Felix Cavalieri, right?
Yeah.
I just saw him recently, and also David Brigatti was just here, Eddie Brigatti's brother, and we're all very close.
Opened up for the Beatles at Shea Stadium, didn't they, in '66? On the phone from New York, Miss May Pang, author, and May was also the personal assistant of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and a record rep in the late 1960s, right through actually, you've been working all the way through the new millennium, because you mentioned Mick Jagger. I think you had something to do with the Best of Mick Jagger record, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I mean, all this time I've saved all those, those tapes that, John, we did mixes for it and the whole thing, and John wanted that record out way back when, and it just never happened, and all of a sudden now it was like, oh yeah, whatever happened to the tapes? Well, I had a copy.
You've done a lot, and I think Walls and Bridges was reissued, wasn't it, digitally, and some bonus tracks added?
I think so, but I didn't have anything to do with that one. The only thing I had to do was the original record, and I was I'm very proud of that record, obviously, and it was great. Besides singing on it and doing all the whispering, I mean, John thought I guess my participation that he actually gave me when it became when it went gold, he gave me a gold record for it.
It's that Instamatic Karma, right, man?
Yes.
Well, before you split, I hope you will at least be DJ on our radio station down here in Washington and set up the John Lennon classic Stand By Me from the album Rock and Roll. Would you do that for us?
Oh, sure. I mean, here we go, John.
Tell us a little bit about Stand By Me, why he picked that tune, because we know Benny King came from the Five Crowns, went into the Drifters,
right,
and then went on his own in '61, left the Drifters, and, was a solo
He just loved
artist.
The song. John loved the song. When he loved a good beat, and he just loved that shuffle, he just, he went for it. It's the same way when he wrote, he heard Shame, 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 and in there was a good riff, and he liked the riff in that, and next thing you know, he wrote a song with, he was showing it to Bowie and Carlos Alomar, and became Bowie's, I think, first number one hit song, Fame.
Before we wrap up, May, would you like to add anything in conclusion about Instamatic Karma, your new book?
Well, you know what? I hope that everyone will go out and pick it up, and what you're going to see in here is a John that I saw, that from our time together, and it's really, as I said, you're actually seeing John through my eyes.
Well, we're very fortunate to have seen John through your eyes, and and I know he would be very proud, as I mentioned, after 9/11, Paul McCartney being visible in the community there in New York with the firemen and, taking care of business right away. Also, when Keith Richards did Chuck Berry's 60th birthday party, Julian was up there singing, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely, and Julian's getting ready to have a new album out soon, too.
Really?
Yeah, and this book has been really, has been such a labor of love that Julian and Cynthia Lennon wrote the little passage on the back for my book. And when the book was going out for its release, Cynthia Lennon flew over and did a couple of interviews with me. She says, I want to make sure that this book gets off to a good start.
Well, May, when you come to the nation's capital, I hope you will come by Jennifer Street and look us up, come into the studio, and we'll sit down and rap.
You got it.
I would really appreciate it, and we can share more stories about John Lennon. And I know success will crown your efforts with this brand new book. And if people want to pick up the one from the 1980s, it might be reissued. And what's it called again?
Well, it won't be reissued, actually. It's going to be a new book. A total new book.
Really?
Yeah, I will be writing new passages, new things. It'll be taking a little different road. I think people will see a little difference in it, and it'll be fun.
Are there any future events that you'll be attending that maybe we can come out and talk about the life of John Lennon and the times that you shared here in the United States, where we will find you? Where will you be in the days to come?
Well, in the days to come, let's see, I'm in Orillia, Canada, which is just outside of Toronto, and the town of Orillia is celebrating a whole Beatles event weekend, and I'll be up there with Nancy Andrews, who is Ringo's fiancée, and who John and I introduced her to Ringo. So the two of us will be up there, and the two of us will also be at another Beatles event down in Nashville.
Wow, maybe you can say hi to Joey Molan, because he's moving down there.
Oh, yes, he's going to be there, actually. As you're saying this, I'm thinking, so yeah, he's going to be there, too.
Well, tell him we said hello here at the new True Oldies 105.9.
Right, and anybody else wants to take a look at my website, they'll see other things, and also I create my feng shui jewelry.
And you can find out all that info online at your website?
Yes, it's www.maypang.com.
It's funny, May, you mentioned Canada, and our engineer Dave Kimbers here is helping coordinate this interview. And he goes back to the Plastic Ono band. He loved that band that John took up to Canada because that was the start of a lot. The gentleman that put that show on, I believe, also did the Festival Express. Remember that train that went across Canada? Mm-hmm. His name escapes me at the time. But John decided to play Canada, and that kind of shocked everybody that he showed up with Eric Clapton and Klaus Voormann, and there they were, right?
Absolutely. I think, wasn't it Alan White, I think?
That's right, Alan White from Yes, right?
Right. So it's amazing. I mean, if you think about it, the Beatles themselves individually as well, each one of them did something that a lot of other people didn't even realize. George Harrison being the first to ever gather a group of people to perform, all the different various artists. Now you have the Live Aid and all that, but, George Harrison was the first one for the concert for Bangladesh.
And what's so cool is you were there at the beginning also.
I saw
at the drawing board. I mean, think about it. No computer. We didn't have a computer back then in 1969 and 1970. You had to write it all out, didn't you?
Absolutely. You had to do all that. I mean, I was working on the one-to-one concert. I remember John saying to me, not only I don't care if you're working backstage, you got to be on stage and sing with the chorus. I'm going, what? I can't do both. He goes, yes, you are. So I was doing both, and I saw myself up there recently. I just said, oh, my God, I recognize my back. And, that's the type of thing that it's so much excitement from back then. The music was it was great. I mean, there's so much camaraderie. And everybody knew the top 100. You can name a song, and now I can't name one. I have a hard time.
Oh, it's changed.
It's only very sporadic. I do know a few, but, I taught my 17-year-old. I listened to Oldies stations up here. She knows more about Oldies than any of her classmates, and surprised a lot of her teachers.
Well, I hope you'll come through Washington and you'll stop by the new True Oldies 105.9 and sit down. We'll let you play disc jockey. You can stay up with me all night, okay?
Oh, I love it. Great.
May, thank you so much for joining us on Spectrum, and again, best of luck with Instamatic Karma.
Thank you for having me, Tom. Thank you so much.